Welcome to In the Mix, the show that puts masonry in the spotlight, block by block, brick by brick. I'm your host, Adam Hutchinson, Executive Director, Professional Engineer, Industry Advocate, and believer in the power of resilient building design. Every week, I sit down with architects, engineers, contractors, and building owners to break down how masonry makes our communities stronger, safer, and more resilient. We're here to share stories, tackle the tough questions, and help you see what's possible when we build better together. Let's get in the mix. Ben Stapleton has spent more than 2 decades working at the intersection of real estate, sustainability, and innovation. As CEO of USGBC California, he leads one of the country's largest green building organizations, helping train thousands of industry professionals each year while advancing climate resilience, sustainable development, and low-carbon building solutions across the state. In this episode of In the Mix, Ben joins me live from the California Masonry Council's Design and Expo Day to discuss the future of resilient construction, rebuilding after natural disasters, and the role masonry can play in creating stronger, more sustainable communities. Drawing from his work supporting wildfire recovery efforts across California, Ben shares lessons learned from rebuilding after devastating fires, how communities can better prepare for future disasters, and why building materials must be evaluated through a long-term lens rather than a short-term environmental metric. He also explores the growing importance of embodied carbon, transparency in construction materials, and why the masonry industry has a unique opportunity to tell a stronger sustainability story.
Let's get into In the Mix. Ben, what brought you into the masonry industry?
Look, I'm a recovering commercial real estate broker.
Okay.
And I've always been very drawn to nature and sustainability. I've been kind of a green building nerd for probably 20 plus years now. And I've just been always kind of working at this intersection of real estate, innovation, and sustainability. And so I've ran this organization now for about 7 years.
Okay.
And USGBC California is a independent nonprofit across the state of California. We basically help do direct community engagement, education. We train almost 6,500 people a year. So last year, I want to get to 10,000 in the next couple of years. And then we do a lot of work around climate resilience, a lot of work on pilots and innovation, and just doing everything we can to really help make California a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable place for all.
Yeah. So that's really important. Part of the podcast is I go around talking to architects, engineers, contractors, building owners, building officials, people like you to build more resilient communities and more sustainable communities.
Mm-hmm.
So what is USGBC doing in that venue to help people rebuild after the Palisades, or providing resources to communities that helps them build more resilient and sustainable in the future?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is part of why I got into green building work, is because I really believe that buildings give us this opportunity to really not just reduce our impacts on the environment, but really help provide the opportunity for human beings to adapt in an increasingly changing environment. So what I always say is that everything comes home in a building somewhere, whether it's energy, water, waste, health. If you're lucky, you'll come home in a building somewhere. Right. And so if we can create positive impacts in our buildings, it can have these ripple impacts throughout society. And so when it comes to resilience, we're doing a huge amount in that space. You mentioned the wildfires in LA that happened last year. We were very impacted as a team. We had several team members lost their homes. My family and I were evacuated for 5-6 days, and so many people who lost their homes. And we've been doing wildfire work since the Thomas and Woolsey fires in 2018 up in the Ventura area, where we help people rebuild. And we learned a lot about trauma and learned a lot about how long this takes during that time frame. And so we've been on a mission really since then to really help prepare people for these disasters, because when I learned how much can be done that's low cost, no cost to reduce fire risk, I was very blown away personally. And I felt like everybody needs to know this. And no one really had adopted a lot of those things. We have a wildfire defense toolkit you can use to look at your home, look at how to reduce risk. We started doing tours of properties. And then we launched a training for contractors and landscapers a few years ago we call it our wildfire defense certificate to reduce risk. We trained over 3,000 folks through that program.
Wow.
And then when those fires hit, we were kind of like, hey, we've got this network, we got this content. How do we be part of the solution? And so we created a rebuilding guide, which we released in April of last year. We're actually about to release at the end of this month with updated information.
Yep.
And then we do rebuild training for contractors in English and Spanish about once a month.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we're very involved in the efforts. And, it's a really tough thing because it's going to take so long.
Yeah.
And the speed at which it'll happen in LA will actually be much faster than a lot of other places.
Right, because the other places have existing buildings that are standing and aren't affected by the fires, right?
Well, and also supply
communities
chain. Right?
Yeah.
Like LA's got really good supply chain access. Like
Absolutely.
Ports and,
Yeah.
It blew me away. I think I was actually on the commission, the Blue Ribbon Commission for the county working on the rebuilding. And in June of 2025, so the fires happened in January, we were already further ahead than the fires in Lahaina in rebuilding. And a lot of that has to do with just supply chain, ability to remove debris. You start thinking about like access and all these things. And that really blew me away because I was like, oh, wow, we're already further ahead. And at that time, we hadn't even cleared a lot of the debris, but we were already further ahead, which blew me away. So
that is amazing. So you're working with the communities and providing these resources. What can the masonry industry do better to help you guys and help these communities rebuild after disasters?
Well, like the masonry industry, it's really a critical part of how we build anything, right? And so I just spoke here at the conference, and I think masonry has a profound opportunity right now because it is one of the oldest, longest lasting materials that are used to build with. I think we need to create more transparency around masonry as a climate solution, as a lower carbon solution, if it's done right, as a way to reduce long-term energy use. It's good thermal mass. It's very stable and can be used more and more as a building material that is resilient, right? It reduces wildfire risk and all these things. But I think the industry needs to really position itself more that way and have a lot of that story around that.
More marketing, more outreach,
more storytelling around like, look, this is a solution that's been here forever. We're working to improve it to make it more environmentally friendly, and it's going to reduce energy use. It's going to be safer, more stable. And the other thing I like about masonry is when you look at reuse, a lot of the materials can be reused out of masonry over time. You can be ground up again for a new aggregate. It can be used for other stuff. And so the life cycle cost of masonry should be less.
It should be. And I don't know if we've set up the product category rules in a way that allows that to be accounted for at the moment, because everybody's working on EPDs that are environmental product declarations that are cradle to gate. So as soon as we see all these numbers, they're coming from all of our industries, and all of the architects are basing our numbers off of that early stage where everything's the manufactured process, which is very favorable to some materials, very unfavorable to our material, right? Where a lot of our energy consumption is upfront, and then it just lasts forever, or it's recyclable, or in our case, we also sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, which is really important.
I didn't realize that EPDs don't take into account that life cycle cost component because it is just cradle to gate. It's not cradle to grid. That's kind of fascinating, actually.
So when we do our life cycle cost analysis, we need to look at the whole cradle to grave analysis. How long does that building actually stand up for? Those materials, how long are they actually looking to live? Right.
And it's interesting too how much
material.
The framing impacts kind of what you do.
It does, right?
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things that I'm looking for is information on how I can get information out there better. We already got the podcast going, but I'm one guy, right? How do we get more messaging and more outreach out there to help support you guys and how you guys are working with the rebuild effort, how CMC is doing with their technical expertise and marketing? But what do you see that the masonry industry can do?
A couple of things. In fact, one of the things I just announced here at the conference, we actually released today a request for information, an RFI for low carbon concrete solutions in advance of the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games in LA. And so part of that is because we recognize that there's less familiarity with lower carbon options, especially for building new buildings or serious infrastructure. But for the Olympics, it's actually kind of a perfect fit because most of the work that's going to be done is sidewalk, streetscape, sitescape stuff. And there's just not enough awareness around these lower carbon options. And so we released this request for information. We're going to gather all that stuff up and release a report on September 17th at an event we're going to have called Carbon Forward. And we're going to also release information on trends. And then we're going to take that and distribute it to all the cities, distribute it to all the Olympic venues. Say, as you're doing these improvements, here's options you can use to reduce the environmental impacts.
So who's going to be at that event?
Hopefully we'll have some in the masonry industry, and we'll also have the cities I just mentioned will also have folks in the LA 28 venues.
Okay.
And a lot of architects and GCs and folks who work in the space who care about embodied carbon.
Yeah. So great opportunity to get in front and message how carbon can be sequestered into concrete and permanently stored, not necessarily stored, but changed into an actual raw material of limestone. So that's great. And then the biggest question that I have that nobody wants to talk about is, what's the biggest threat that we have in the masonry industry that we're not addressing at the moment that you see from somebody outside of the masonry industry?
Yeah, I don't know if I can speak for the masonry industry so directly into the biggest threat. I think we're having more transparency now than we've ever had before in materials.
Yeah.
I think that transparency is going to increase. All the policy is headed in that direction too. So one thing that I want to impart to this community is that like the policy is starting to look at embodied carbon on a state level for bigger projects. Cities are starting to pass policy. We're seeing low carbon concrete policy. So I think a threat is not really leaning in and not really doing the work to look at alternative materials, look at alternative construction methods, and be transparent around data. If you're not transparent around your data, people are just going to use AI to estimate what it is.
Right.
And that could be a lot worse than what you're really dealing with. So I think we're at this opportunity where this transparency, focus on innovation, focus on the opportunity that this is local manufacturing, right? We're talking about local jobs that build this stuff, because I think that'll have more and more weight in the years to come.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you taking the time to sit with us and discuss all of these topics. And
awesome.
It's great to have you. And thanks for giving the keynote today for lunch. And,
and happy to do it.
Hopefully you gain something from coming here, not just giving us information, but also from others.
No, I'm always learning. I'm still learning. And there's a lot of innovation happening in this industry right now.
Yeah.
Which is great to see.
Yeah. Well, if you ever have any questions, feel free to give me a call and I'd be willing to help you out in any way that I can.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Ben.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of In the Mix, where we put masonry in the spotlight, block by block, brick by brick. A big thanks to our guest, Ben Stapleton, for sharing their time and insights with us. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor, click that follow button, leave a quick review, and share it with someone who cares about building smarter and stronger. You can connect with me, Adam Hutchinson, on LinkedIn, and find bonus content from today's episode at masonrymix.com. In the Mix is produced by Espresso Podcasts and hosted by yours truly, Adam Hutchinson. You can find the podcast wherever podcasts are found. Hosting of this podcast was made possible by the Northwest Masonry Institute and the California Masonry Council. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building strong. See you right here next week in the Mix.